So what's your podcast about?
Superheroes.
It's a little geeky, but I think you guys are gonna like it.
Try not to be too geeky.
No, I can't promise that.
Should we begin?
It's a bird. It's a plane. It's the Geek and You Shall Find podcast. And now, your hosts, Kelsey Dickerson, Brad Fay, Kate Fay, and Noah Berlin.
Hold on to your butts.
Welcome to the Geek and You Shall Find podcast. My name is Noah. I am very thankful to have Brait back with me to talk Rings of Power, so you don't have to listen to me ramble solo about all things Middle-earth anymore. Although if you're into that kind of thing, make sure to go back, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and listen to my Geek Peaks, the shorter episodes, with my takeaways from the previous 3 episodes. But like I said, Brad and Kate are back with me today to talk about Alloyed, the Ring of Power season finale. And we're going to give you all of our awards from season 1. So a lot to talk about today, all in the Rings of Power universe. Goes without saying, you should probably watch this episode before listening or watching this podcast. Of course, there will be spoilers for this installment of the show, as well as the season as a whole. But let's get into it. This episode, we saw no dwarves, we saw no Southlanders, and for the most part, the episode itself followed 2 main storylines. So let's get started with the one that everyone's talking about and the reveal that we all waited a full season for. Kate, I'm going to start with you. What are your thoughts on Halbrand and the big reveal that he is indeed Sauron?
Well, I'm a little conflicted because I really liked Halbrand throughout the entire season. Thought he was super attractive and also just seemed like a pretty decent guy. I don't know. I just really liked him. So it was kind of a little bit unsettling to know that I had a little crush on Sauron, I guess. I'm not sure that it was like that big of a reveal for me personally. I mean, I think, and in your previous podcast, you said this too, Noah, like, I think it was they were hinting pretty hard that he was Sauron. So I wasn't super surprised, but I thought that the way that they did it with kind of the visions with Galadriel and, you know, him taking over the form of her brother, them going back to the raft and him saying like, let's do this together. Like, I thought that was really cool. And I really liked seeing that.
Brad, what about you? Was this a surprise to you? Like, where were you? And if it wasn't a surprise to you, when do you think you knew? When was it cemented in your mind that he was Sauron?
So I swear it's like easy to say this like in hindsight, but I feel like I've known like all season long. But it was really funny because I think it was the episode maybe it was 2 episodes ago, the episode that ends with the big like cataclysmic explosion kind of thing, when Theo like unwraps the sword and sees that it got swapped out. I was like, oh, now it's confirmed, now I know for sure. And then it cuts to that shot. It ends up being like the random villager kind of turning the key.
Waldreg.
Not random villager.
Waldreg.
Waldreg. Sorry. No disrespect to Waldreg.
No, he deserves all the disrespect.
Yeah, you can disrespect him.
When it cut to that shot of him about to do it, I thought it was Halbrand. And I was like, yep, knew it, called it. And then it was him. And I was like, oh, maybe not. And then the next episode started and nothing. I was like, damn, maybe I keep like thinking I like cracked the code, but I'm like, maybe not. And then this episode, I was like, finally. So it was good to finally get like a theory of mine confirmed.
Yeah, it was interesting because, and we'll hit on this a little bit later, kind of the misdirection that the showrunners and the producers kind of did with us throughout the entire season, because really all the fans, everybody that watched this show, every episode, they're thinking, okay, who is Sauron? Is it Halbrand? Is it the stranger? Is it someone we haven't met yet? Is it somebody else that we have met that we just don't know? It's, you know, so the whole time everyone is watching this, picking apart any clue that could lead to the reveal of who Sauron is. And so I think that ultimately it was done really, really well, because it wasn't laid on too thick. Like, it was definitely established, where there are other things where I just reminds me of the last scenes in the Game of Thrones where we could argue about this. We don't have to get into it totally, but it's like, when Daenerys goes bad and kills all the innocent people of King's Landing, it's like, okay, was that earned? You know what I mean? Was that out of nowhere? And I think this one, it didn't give it away entirely, but I think it was definitely earned. So I think that they did it really effectively.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that, because my first thought was like, well, wait a second, like he wanted to just stay in Numenor. He didn't want to fight. And then when he ended up, going to this battle, like he was fighting against the orcs and stuff. So it didn't make sense for a second. And then I'm like, oh wait, like that was Adar was the guy that used to work for him, and he's pissed at him, and so he wants to take over. So it does make sense of why he was kind of on Galadriel's side the entire time.
Yeah,
And
so
to Noah's point too, like that's why it was so well done too. Not only like the bait and switch and like, okay, I think I got to figure it out. No, I don't. Like, not only did they do a great job of that, but like, I mean, this is like a long show. These are not like easy episodes to like take in. So, it just says a lot that this season can end. You're like, I want to go back and like rewatch it right now and like start to see all these things that I maybe didn't pick up on. I mean, this is not a show you would expect to end season one and be like, I'm going to go back and rewatch it right now. But, it's a sign they did it right.
yeah, and that's my favorite part about shows that I like, where you watch it and you really enjoy it, but you also are like, man, I got to go back and rewatch this because there's so many things that I'll be able to pick up on the second rewatch. But let's go through it, right? To me, I suspected Halbrand also of being Sauron throughout really the entire series. However, I really was going back and forth, and there was some, I mean, we could go back and check the receipts, but there are certain podcasts that we did from season one where, I really was convinced that the stranger was Sauron, because particularly, I mean, I think that they did it on purpose, where when the meteor crashed to Middle Earth and they show that aerial shot, and I just keep seeing that in my mind where like he's in the fetal position laying there and the fire around him, it looks so much like Sauron's eye. And I'm like, that can't be a coincidence. And plus the prophecy that Sauron's return is coincides with a meteor crashing it, you know what I mean? So I'm like, that can't be a coincidence too. So they did a good job with that. But if we're going with this episode, I mean, I was going back and forth the whole time. The first time we see him in this episode, I knew. And it was when he's there getting elvish medicine and he's fine all of a sudden. And then we see him, he's up and looking around. He's in Celebrimbor's workshop. He's just wandering around in there. And at the exact moment, I'm like, oh, Sauron, bam, easily. Like he knew of Celebrimbor. They talk about Feanor's jewel craft, and he's the one that made the Silmarils. We talked about that in a previous episode too. And then he gives the advice and he's like, call it a gift. And it's like, okay, this guy, I mean, it's just such a whole Sauron gives the gift of these rings of power to these races and tricks them. And I mean, it's literally like they laid it on pretty thick in this episode, I thought.
Yeah. No, that's a good point too. Like you start like, yeah, and that's why I would want to go back. Like at this point, you see him pulling the strings and it's a little bit more obvious. Like, they're like, we're going to make it a crown. And he's like, if only there was something else that was round that could be worn on someone's, I don't know, finger. Like, I can't put my finger on it, but we need to think of something else. But like, yeah, it seems like he was way craftier early on where like he even had us fooled.
Yeah. And I'm glad that Galadriel really did pick up on it quickly, because I thought it was going to be a whole thing where she just doesn't think about it, or like it doesn't hit her, and it's like it's so obvious, Galadriel, like come on. And especially when she's talking and Celebrimbor is like, he says exactly what Adar said in a previous episode, where he's like, we're on the cusp of a new kind of power, not of strength but of spirit, not of the flesh but over flesh. This is a power of the unseen world. And like it's literally word for word exactly what Adar said. So
wow, I didn't catch that.
Totally.
But I heard she was like, where did you hear that? And he doesn't
Exactly.
really answer. He's like really super shifty about it. So
Yeah, he's like, oh, I was talking to my Smiths. One of them might have said it. I don't know. Like, okay. Yeah, some random like.
I know we're not doing like an LVP for this episode, but he was like the LVP for this episode. Like he was super shady then. And Brad and I were kind of talking while we were watching it. We're like, he's supposed to be like the best of the best, right? And like making all this stuff. And he like can't figure out like how to like put these metals together. And then he's like, you know, messing all this stuff up. And he has to have Hallbrand, Sauron come in and give him all these suggestions. We're like, what is this guy doing?
It is funny too, because like they introduced Celebrimbor, I think, at the end of the first episode. And I knew, just knowing of the story, even though I didn't read the books, that Celebrimbor is the one that creates the Rings of Power. It's not that Sauron creates them and gives them and they all just believe him. Like, if they create it themselves, they're just manipulated into it. So I was really interested to see how that would happen, because in my mind, I'm like, this guy is the worst because he just ruins everything, obviously. But like the way that they show how it actually happened was kind of cool. But you're totally right. I mean, all of a sudden he was just totally incompetent. And you know, like the back of Hallbrand's mind, he's like, God damn, I got to give another like blatant advice. Like, what do I sprinkle some evil in it and like you'll be good, dude. Like, what do you do?
And it was some like basic shit too. It was kind of like, oh, all these metals keep conflicting. And then he has to be like, what if you found a metal that agreed with the other metal? And he's like, agreed with, of course. Like,
genius.
Try that.
Yeah, that was weird.
How funny was it too when Galadriel was like, all right, I'm getting some shady vibes from Hallbrand, and she's like, let me just hire my private investigator. I'm gonna hire Jessica Jones, my little elfin private investigator, who's like, all right, let me go find out the tea for you. And like, what was that?
Yeah,
That was
what
awesome.
was it? We were commenting on that, dude. We're like, who'd this dude come from that she like all like trust with everything? Like, this is the most important information that I trust you with. I'm like, who is this guy?
Random elf.
Yeah,
Random
but
elf.
that was very funny, the tee up. Yeah. So then before they have the big reveal, Hallbrand and Galadriel are talking, and he says something to her which I thought was like kind of cool, and it definitely it depends how you took it and if you realize that he was Sauron before this or after this. But he's like, no, thank you for what you've done for me. I'll never forget it, and I'll see to it that nobody else does either. And like, if you didn't realize that was Sauron, it's like, oh wow, good, like she'll get credit for saving this dude. But if you do realize it's Sauron, you're like, holy shit, that sounds like a threat, and it sounds like she's going to be screwed.
That was a great line. That was a great line. The way, like, that was like gave me chills. The way, oh, I'll make sure no one forgets what you've done. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And that actor, he did so great in this episode. Like, he was so creepy and like, ooh, he just like gave me the chills.
Yeah, totally. And I just started when this part happened, and I'm realizing that this is very highly likely Sauron, and thinking about just like, man, Galadriel like really fucked up. If this is Sauron, like and it just went back to that quote from the High King in episode 1 when he's talking to her, and he said, for the same wind that seeks to blow out a fire might also cause it spread. And that's literally exactly what she did over the course of this entire season. Like, and it's true, he wanted to stay in Numenor. Like, what if that would have happened? Like, would he just not really have become Sauron? He just would have gone a different path? Like, or would it just have happened differently? Like, but I mean, every step of the way, she made him into basically what he is going to become, which is just kind of crazy.
But that's why I think, and you guys might have picked up on this better than me, but that's why I would want to rewatch it, is I'm like, did he want to stay in Numenor? Like, remember how interested he was in like the craft shop, and he was like begging to get up in the craft shop. So I'm like, maybe that was the story he told, knowing like, oh, well, I've sprinkled enough seeds where now I could easily play it off as, hey, I wanted to stay here. But I'd be interested in going back and rewatching it and be like, but did he ever do anything that actually showed he wanted to stay here, or was that just a narrative he wanted to plant?
So we saw at the end of this episode the creation of the first Rings of Power, and it was the 3 that went to the elves. We know that Rings of Power will be made then for the dwarves and for the men as well. So maybe he just kind of changed up the order of this. And if he was in Numenor and like he got the job as the smith there, maybe he would have started with the men and like made the rings. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty interesting to think about.
Yeah, I would want to know like what his actions are rather than like that's always what's stuck on our heads of like, dude just wanted to stay in Numenor. He was like, let me be. But I'm like, but did his actions ever show that? Like, and it's it's hindsight. Like I can't remember offhand. Like I remember going to jail and blah blah blah. So I'd want to go back and rewatch and be like, man, he planted all these breadcrumbs to get exactly what he wanted from the beginning. Like ever since he got saved from the ocean.
Well, when thinking about Hallbrand, they particularly the vision where Hallbrand and Galadriel are on the raft again, which was the same from I think episode 2. And he basically says like, I'm your friend, like you knew before, I never lied to you, I told you the truth, you knew I had done evil, I told you that, and you knew that our past meant nothing weighed against our future. And like, it's true, he's right, he wasn't I mean, he was manipulating her, but he was not lying to her. And it was actually really cool visually when they show kind of like the camera angle shifts and the raft almost goes upside down and you see the reflections, and it's literally like the reflection of Dark Lord Sauron and like the Dark Queen, I guess she would be, something like that. So that was very, very cool. And she's like, you'd make me a tyrant. And he's like, I'd make you a queen. And she's like, oh, so you're the Dark Lord? And he's like, not dark. You bind me to the light and I bind you to power. So my question to you is, do you think he always was going to be this Dark Lord? Like if Galadriel would have gone with him, obviously she would have been evil too, but would it have been like a different type of way that it all went down, where like there would be a little light and dark and like, it's more of a power thing than an evil thing?
That's a really good question, because I was
That's a
kind of
good
thinking
question.
like during that moment, I was like, is there compromise and was there ever compromise in this character at one point? Like, all right, the orcs are evil and they're monsters, but they also can't survive in the daylight. So it would make sense they need to exist in this world of darkness. Like, would he have been a good leader of being like, okay, you guys can have this area? Like, we know this character as like, I want the world covered in dark, but was there a time in which he was a little bit more like, willing to negotiate and be like, okay, orcs need this, they need to live here, you guys can live here. So I mean, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that, of like, was there gonna be a better version of him at one point?
Kate, what do you think?
I mean, I don't know, to Brad's point, like he seems pretty savvy. Like obviously this whole time he's been undercover and knows how to manipulate people. I don't know, it was so interesting, that part, like when he said that about he would be binded to her by the light, like that was really interesting to me. And he also, like in that same scene, says something about how he and Galadriel want the same thing. They just want peace on Middle Earth. So I thought, I don't know, that was so interesting to me, because I'm like, well, that doesn't seem right, because we know he's just like this evil guy that's gonna like take over, everything, and lives in Mordor, and does all this stuff in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I don't know. I can't imagine that he would be like good or somebody who compromises, like even if he was with Galadriel, like I think he would still corrupt her.
And honestly, that's what I think is really interesting about Adar, and exactly what you said, Brad, about like, oh, well, maybe he's only doing this because he's looking out for the orcs. Like, we'll see what Halbrand / Sauron's relationship with them looks like, and how he becomes even more evil, and the goals and the power hungry and all that good stuff. But Adar, I thought was really cool, because you can tell that they call him Adar, which means father. That is not his name. And he considers himself to be their actual father. And they have a loving I mean, the first time we see him, he had to put an orc out of its misery because it got injured. And it was like a sad moment. They had a whole ritual for the orcs, and like honored the dead. And it just seems so much more of like than a mindless horde army. And it's like actually ones that he cares about. And that's the reason that Adar wanted to erupt Mount Doom and all that to take care of the orcs and let them live and have a place to settle down, I guess, right? So I think that that's super interesting, and where Sauron fits into that, we'll see. But the scene here where she's like, I'm not doing it, I'm going to stop you, and he tells her she has no choice because without him, the elves are going to die. Like, her people are all going to die. The shadow will spread and the darkness will cover the world. And he says to her, he's like, what will they do when you tell them that you are my ally? What that Sauron lives because of you, right? And it's like, damn, I mean, it's true. She's screwed, right?
Yeah.
And also she's between a rock and a hard place, because it's like, yeah, you could prevent him from winning potentially, but by doing that, you're also killing all of your kind. So what do? So she makes a compromise and does what she thinks is right by letting them proceed with the work. But she says to make 3 rings instead of 1, because 1 will be used to dominate, 2 will be used to divide, and with 3, there's going to be balance. So, I mean, obviously the rings did their job, and Sauron wins ultimately. So I don't think that plan worked, but it also reminded me of the 2 Towers, where Frodo is like, I don't want the ring. Galadriel here, like, take it. And she's like, wow, you give me this ring freely. In a place of a dark lord, you will have a queen. I shall not be dark, but beautiful, and terrible as the morning and the night, dreadful as the storm and lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me in despair. And obviously then she rejects the ring and realizes she passed the final test of the spell that the ring could put you under, and she's like, I'm good, I passed, and now I could go live out the rest of my days in Valinor or whatever. And that's kind of the end of her story there. But it reminded me a lot of that, where when he's like, let's do this together, and she's rejecting him, and it kind of comes full circle to, again, that scene in the 2 Towers.
I'm glad you like mentioned that too, because I think that is another example of just like how much more nuanced this seems in like the Lord of the Rings we like quote unquote grew up with, like the Peter Jackson film. I mean, everything is literally like black and white. Orcs are evil. There's no like nothing but like, one of the moments I remember from the season is when, the orcs are getting ready to go into battle, and like Adar is giving that speech and is like, they've enslaved us, today's the day we rise up. Like, you're never getting like orc motivational speeches before. They're just evil. Like, and it's hard to be like, boo, stay enslaved. Like, you're like, yeah, I kind of get why these guys are upset, and like they want their species to survive, and this is what they need. Like, you were never getting that before in the older Lord of the Rings. You were just like, yo, they're evil, that's it. And like, I'm glad we're starting to see like, whether it be other sides of Sauron, and be like, maybe he wasn't always just like a pure like evil character, and that's been it from the get-go. Maybe there's more to these characters than we kind of like have been led to believe, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, the only one we have is, I want to say, in the 2 Towers also, when Saruman is like on that balcony giving a hype speech to the army of orcs that are about to march to Helm's Deep. But he's like, there's no like personal touch there, and like love for these. He's like, tonight you will dine on man flesh, and they're all like, like, that's all you got, right? It has nothing to do with like they care about him. But
like, oh, I kind of see where they're coming from a little bit.
You know what, I'm thinking I'm on this side. Yeah. Totally. But yeah, I mean, that's why shows like this, and House of Dragon too, like all these prequel shows, that they add so much more weight to the things that we already know of, because it adds more context, it adds more backstory, and more meaning to these elements. So I just think it's really, really cool. So the other main plot point that we see in this episode was the one revolving around the Harfoots, the Stranger, and what are called the Mystics. So similarly, I'll start this one by asking you, Kate, the same question. When did you know that the Stranger was, let's just say, a wizard for now? Did you know in advance? Did you have any inkling of who he might be?
I mean, kind of similar to your answer before, like I had an idea that Halbrand was Sauron, and this was like an early wizard, maybe even Gandalf, like an early Gandalf, I don't know. but I kind of felt like that throughout the whole series. I just really liked him. He seemed really sweet and like just wanting to help the Harfoots. So I really didn't want him to be Sauron, and I'm really glad that he's not. But I wasn't sure until, you know, they actually said like, oh, this isn't Lord Sauron. This is an Ishtari, I think it was, or something, but whatever that word that means wizard. And then I was like, okay,
yeah.
confirmed. Great. I'm really glad we can still root for him.
Yeah. So, but going back to that opening scene, I want to say it was the opening scene of the episode where the mystics, they pose as Nori and they kind of bring in the stranger so he feels comfortable, and then they bow to him and they call him Lord Sauron, and then it cuts to a different scene. Did this make you rethink what you just said? Where was your head at once this scene happened?
So in the initial scene, I was like, oh man, like I can't believe like this nice guy that did all these like nice things and seems really caring is Sauron. So I did think that it was Sauron just because of how they were reacting to him, and they basically said it's Lord Sauron. So I was upset for a couple minutes until they found out that they were wrong.
They said, you fell from the stars, but you're far greater than they, for fire obeys your will. You fell below the dust, yet the dust fears you, for it trembles when you are wroth. The winds and waters, the heat and cold. In ruin you shall learn to command them all, and every being that walks or crawls shall be your slave, for you are Lord Sauron. It's like,
yeah.
Damn.
It's funny how like good showrunners, filmmakers, directors, whatever, like can just manipulate the hell out of us. And like,
I know.
You're right. Like when they said that and they bowed along, I was like, damn, this is I'm like, wait, why do I just assume these people know? Like, but it's just funny that we're like, damn, and then it's like, wait, why did I just buy that because I was told that? So yeah, that was a really good, like another time when like the rug was pulled out from underneath me.
Yeah, I think they cut straight from that though to the scene of Hallbrand with Celebrimbor, and I think at that exact moment I was just like, okay, that's bullshit, because I just felt so strongly when you see him in that talking to Celebrimbor, he had already heard of him, all that stuff, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is some bullshit.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I don't think I got that vibe from that. Like as much as I could be like, oh, I knew it was him, and I feel like I did. That scene when he was wandering around, that's interesting that you kind of picked up on, man, he's full of it right now. Because I don't know if I was getting that vibe at that time until it got a little bit further and he's like obviously planting ideas and stuff. But I don't think I like jumped to that conclusion right away.
Well, I think because I just had it in my mind last episode when we find him, like he wasn't in the episode hardly at all when we see like the aftermath of the eruption of Mount Doom. And then we see him towards the end of the episode and he's all messed up, but we don't see how he got messed up. We don't see any of that. And then Galadriel comes in, she's like, oh, he needs elvish medicine. You see them riding off. And so I'm just thinking like, oh, maybe he either did that to himself or it's all fake because he just wants a reason to go to like the elf land or whatever. Like, so I kind of had that in my mind the whole time. And when all of a sudden the first time we see him, he's totally fine and he's wandering around like Celebrimbor. I mean, that it really lit up sparks for me.
Yeah. As soon as we saw him, like you could just tell like the vibes were off. Like he seemed really like shady and like, I don't know, he was just acting weird.
Scheming, for sure.
Yeah, like this is the guy.
Yeah, if he was in House of the Dragon, he would have had a hood on and that basically the whole scene.
I was gonna say maybe the nightgown threw me off. Like I trust anyone in a nightgown. Anyone wandering around in a nightgown, like I just trust. So that might have been what was messing me up.
The trustworthy nightgown for sure. Well, the mystics, there were 3 of them, and honestly, the CGI, the effects, and the magic and stuff that they've done now in 2 episodes in a row have been really, really cool looking. I think that as much as they were probably a little underutilized, where they didn't, I don't think, say a word until this episode, and then they're dead just as quickly as they came. I mean, we saw a lot of cool stuff from them. So you had the ascetic, the nomad, and the dweller. That was the names of the 3. And I only know that because I paused the episode at one point and Amazon Prime showed me on the pause screen that these are the names of the characters. But the Harfoots are just cool. I mean, they sing songs. They're just kind of lame and you know, they're not fighters, but at the same time, like they have each other's back. And it was just cool to see them, you know, do what they did in this episode and try to sneak around and these all powerful magical beings. So that was really cool. And I think in this episode, if we're not doing MVPs and awards for this episode, we're doing them a little bit later on just the season as a whole. But I think Nori could be an MVP because she's awesome. And it's impossible not to root for her. And really in the relationship with her and the stranger, I suppose. But tell me, Brad, and I know specifically that you probably thought this too, but when they were kind of fighting, they were hiding in the bushes and the trees, and they were trying to fight the mystics, and they were kind of throwing little rocks at them like from above. And didn't it remind you of like the Ewoks versus the stormtroopers in Return of the Jedi? Like,
Yeah,
didn't it feel like that a little?
These cute little guys like fighting their little battle. Good for them. They're
Like
gonna
throwing
get
little
out.
rocks that you know are going to do nothing to them.
Setting up little booby traps to like trip them. Like, yeah, and then all of a sudden it got hard and like dude got stabbed or like
Yeah, he got shanked.
jumped out and like stabbed her in the foot. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, that's. But I mean, I guess the Ewoks kind of had their little like tri-tip spears, so I guess they got down and dirty a little bit too. But yeah, that's a good comparison.
Yeah,
Yeah, and if you think about it, it was like women, right? Like one woman, two kids, and an old guy that were like trying to fight them. And it was like so brave of them.
yeah.
And one of them was named Poppy, so like that's a big disadvantage, like right there too.
That'd be a good point.
Like, your odds are not good if you have someone named Poppy on your team.
Yeah, so they end up getting the mystic staff, giving it to the stranger, and he basically kills them. And they have this really awesome CGI where like they turn into like skulls, and they almost look like the Nazgul in the other realm, but then they turn into moths and like kind of go away. I don't even know how to describe that really, but I thought that looked really, really cool.
Do you think they're gonna explain like who they were, like what they were doing, why they thought this was Sauron, like, or are they just like gone now?
I feel like they probably are not the only three. And so maybe next season as like Hallbrand, because he doesn't really have any followers now, right? At least he's on his own, Sauron. So maybe he'll meet up with like this clan of this group, or I don't know.
Do you think moths are like an antithesis to like butterflies? Because isn't Gandalf like, I don't know, he has like some relationship with butterflies, if I remember. Like I think
No,
he,
it's
like,
a moth. It's a moth too, where he like when Sauron imprisons
okay.
him, and like the moth comes and he like communicates with it, and then then the eagle comes and rescues him.
Okay, because I remember like Lord, doesn't he make like the fireworks go off and like the butterfly or something like when he goes to like the hobbits, you know, like to celebrate and all that stuff. I think he's doing stuff with like butterfly or like fireworks or something, but maybe, you know, I'm not sure. So I was wondering if like the moth was like meant to represent like the opposite of like the evil wizards and the good wizards or something like that.
I mean, maybe. And I mean, that's interesting I'm interested to look that up, of just like the meaning of moths and like where they, you know, why that would be the symbology that they did there. But so we find out that the stranger is an Istar, which in, I guess, the English language or the Harfoot language, whatever we're speaking in the show, means wise one or wizard. So that's very, very cool. And so I thought he would most likely be a wizard that we only know of Gandalf, of Saruman from the Lord of the Rings movies, and then in The Hobbit we meet oh man, what's his name? The one that had with bird shit all over him.
Yeah, I know he's on like something with a B, right? Like Boromir?
And we just talked about him in a previous episode.
I know.
I'm blanking on it. I'll get it later, but we meet him as well. So there are two other wizards that we never meet. There's 5 total wizards that come to Middle Earth that are Maiar, and so I thought he'd be kind of one of these other wizards. But then he says, and he's like, yeah, I'm not really sure where to go. And he goes, oh, we're gonna go this way. There's a sweet smell this way. When in doubt, Eleanor Brandyfoot, always follow your nose. And I literally just rewatched The Fellowship of the Ring last week,
Oh, wow.
And he says to Frodo when they're in Moria and they're all just kind of waiting to try to figure out where to go, and he says, "Oh, we're gonna go that way. The air doesn't smell so foul out there." He says, "When in doubt, Frodo Baggins, always follow your nose." He says literally that exact same thing. And so I'm like, holy shit, like he's not an unnamed wizard. This is Gandalf. And it makes sense because we know Gandalf loves the hobbits. That's not a common thing for wizards and stuff to just have this relationship with these creatures. And so maybe like this is the backstory of why Gandalf loves the hobbits, because they're descendants of the Harfoot. And I just think that's so cool. So what do you think? Do you guys think that he is Gandalf as well, or do you think that he's somebody else?
Kate.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's Gandalf. Mainly because that's like the most popular wizard, and that's like the only one that I know. But also because of the quote, like that's something that I kind of read online of like that was in the movies, and I'm like, well, it has to be him, right? If he's saying the exact same thing.
You'd think.
I thought the same thing too, of like how cool would it be, like Gandalf is known for having a special relationship with the hobbits, that he would have developed that at this time. So all the pieces are in place, and I would be kind of disappointed if it ends up like not, if that ends up being another like switch. But our crack research team has gotten us an answer on the other wizard.
Oh, really?
And it's funny you mentioned bird shit, because his name is Radagast the Brown.
Yes, Radagast. That's right. Yes, Radagast.
So,
Man,
those are three wizards.
That crack research team, they need a pay
They're
raise.
good.
That's for sure. They are good. They are good. Well, other than these two main plot lines, I think there was only one, and you could correct me, but I think there's only one other scene that didn't kind of fall directly within this plot line, and it was with Arian, who is Elendil's daughter, and she is picked to be one of the people to sketch the dying king as he's laying on his deathbed, which was weird, I guess.
Yeah.
But you just know that there's a moment, and I did read earlier in the year that Arian, this character, was made up for this show. Like he doesn't, Elendil doesn't have a daughter in the books.
Oh.
So obviously if she's going to be a new character, she will serve a purpose. And over the course of the first season, she really served no purpose. And so I just was thinking, as soon as they showed her, and they showed her with King Tar Palantir, that like this is going to be the reason. And essentially, like he has he's known for having these prophecies, the seeing stones that we saw in Lord of the Rings, and we saw in the end of this episode. They're named after him. They are called Palantir seeing stones, where his name is Tar Palantir. But he thinks she's Muriel. He said, "There's still time to warn you. If the old ways of our people are not soon restored, our island will fall." That's something that they've teased throughout this entire season of the fall of Numenor. But he goes in with the seeing stone. He says, "Do not as I did. I looked for too long, and now I cannot separate what is from what was from what will be." And then she goes and takes the thing off, and that scene ends with her looking in the seeing stone. So any predictions of where that's going to go, why they included it?
I mean, who knows, but I definitely think that she is going to use the Palantir, and she's going to see, and I don't know how those work, like if it's a different vision for each person that touches it, or like how that works. But
it's supposed to be that they're all connected, and so you're able to see what's going on in other ones. And so in, I want to say, Two Towers, like they know that they're dangerous because not all of them have been accounted for. So you don't know who could be watching through other ones.
Interesting. Okay.
No, I mentioned this to Kate. Were you also floored by the fact that we've now had twice within 1 week of an old dying king thinking someone was his daughter
On the deathbed?
And you're like, that's not your daughter, dude. Be very careful.
Open your eyes. Stop taking milk of the poppy, dude. Just what are you doing?
That's so crazy. Those aired like in the same week.
I know.
Like, what are the chances?
That's so funny.
I wonder if the Rings of Power people were watching House of the Dragon on Sunday and we're like, oh shit.
Like, God damn it.
I feel like it's like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where it's like
Totally. Yeah, Kate, I mean, any little predictions though of like where this is gonna go, or not really?
I don't know. I mean, I agree with you that like the daughter and really oh my gosh, what's his name? Isildur.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in it more and definitely had more of a storyline, but like they kind of weren't a huge part of this series. So I was kind of wondering the whole time, like, what are they doing here? Especially the daughter for sure, because she was barely in it. So I think she's probably going to play a pretty big part in season 2. What that is, I don't know. But maybe she'll have kind of the same insight that Muriel has of Numenor being destroyed and somehow work against that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I had no idea, but you just got me thinking. Maybe if there's evil on the other side of that, like it kind of manipulates her on the side at Numenor, and like that could help or could lead to the destruction of Numenor too, because of outside influences through the Palantir. Maybe, I have no idea.
I mean, the other big thing to keep in mind with this is her relationship, and I'll butcher these names, but that's fine. Her relationship with, is it Keeman, who's like Farazan's son?
Yep.
Like now they're gonna be privy to this information that they might. So what is he? I mean, I always call the Farazan guy High Father, but like he seems like he might use this now to his advantage somehow. Like if they go that route, like this definitely opens up a lot of doors for like potential drama to take place within that like group.
Mm-hmm. Well, overall, I thought it was a great episode. I thought it was a great finale, and it was one of those where after the previous episode, I had no idea where this was going to go, and there was only one episode left. They had a lot to accomplish, and I feel like they did a really nice job of that. So I'm glad, and I'm very excited to. I'll probably end up rewatching it before season 2 for sure. So I'm excited for that as well. But let's move on to our awards, our season-long awards from season 1. So the first one, as always, is our MVP. And again, this is the MVP not just from this episode, but of season 1 in general. Brad, let's start with you. Who was your MVP from season 1?
I mean, my MVP, I gotta go with my guy J.R.R. Tolkien. Like with the exception of, like obviously the acting is brilliant, the costumes, the makeup, the special effects. Like there's tons of behind the scenes stuff that like Tolkien himself isn't really responsible for, but so many of the things that I loved about this season, whether it be the mythology and the world building, the characters, the dialogue. I mean, like it's hard like to do these little like nuggets of wisdom, and every quote is like a deep quote that has like some metaphor meaning and stuff, but like they do it so many times and they do it so well. So like I had to give it to Tolkien for like kind of laying the foundation for the series, and now it's up to them to kind of like carry that. Obviously a lot of things are going to change and a lot of things aren't going to be followed from what Tolkien had written down, so now at this point it's up to the showrunners to kind of move that forward, but I've got to give him the MVP for the first season just for like kind of laying down the groundwork.
Okay, I like it. What about you, Kate?
Cool. So I had trouble with this one just because I picked Galadriel, which I mean, from what we know now is like, ooh, maybe a little like cringy, because she basically allowed Sauron to develop and get into the Southlands, and like Mordor happened. So I feel bad about it, but I just really enjoyed watching her this season. Like I think the actress is absolutely phenomenal and so elvish. She played it perfectly. And I just, she was really trying to do the right thing the whole time. She was just trying to avenge her brother. She's trying to save everybody and stop this from happening. And so it wasn't her intention to do that. And I feel like we've all been in those situations, right? Like in our own lives where we're trying to do the right thing, and sometimes it doesn't end up working out so good, and we actually mess stuff up pretty bad. So I kind of feel bad for her. I'm excited to see where her story goes, what's going to happen when people find out that she kind of brought this on.
Which
and
they
also,
will. Because,
yeah.
and then she was trying to keep it a secret, but Elrond found the scroll, So
Right.
it's definitely going to be a thing where people will find out.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing is she is a badass fighter. Like her fight scenes were like, she didn't have that many, but when she did have a fight scene, I mean, it was unreal. Like she's like flipping off her horse and stuff. Like, so I really, really enjoyed watching her. And then just a secondary one, I know this is kind of cheating, but Arendir, loved him, thought he was such a badass. He just seemed like such a good guy, really, again, just trying to do the right thing and trying to save people and be really selfless. And his fight scenes were also insane. And I really liked that.
Nice. Well, yeah, you could be, I agree with all of the things you said, except the argument could be made that Galadriel is actually the LVP of the season.
I know, that's why I was like, oh.
Yeah. But going with that, my MVP was Hallbrand, because he manipulated his way into returning to power, tricking very smart people into doing his bidding, essentially. And I just thought the scene on the raft was really cool, where she's like, I don't understand, how could you be Sauron? Like, you saved me you saved me. And he's like, no, you saved me. And she's like, well, you helped me convince Muriel to go to Middle Earth. And he's like, no, I want to stay in Numenor. You went to Middle Earth, or you convinced her. And she's like, yeah, but you fought beside me. And he's like, yeah, I fought my enemies, which were also your enemies. So it's just interesting how he was able to manipulate all of that. And I just think it was really cool. And ultimately, I mean, he went from being a dude on a raft to being Sauron in the Rings of Power are made, right? And we all know where this is going to lead to. So he is my MVP for sure. And I also thought the actor killed it. And just as we talked about earlier, the way that they approached the mystery behind it, I thought was very well done. So
yeah, it's so crazy that as you're going through that, where he's like, yeah, like I didn't really do anything. You did all of this. And it's just like wild as a watcher to hear that and be like, oh my God, like I was duped this whole time.
Yeah. And plus when he said, and we talked about it, but when he's like, I didn't lie to you. I told you I had done evil and you didn't care. Like, and it's just funny when that was all in the same conversation. It's like, man, she is very stupid. Like she really fucked up. But
right, but like nobody, like
I know, of course,
we were rooting for her the whole time, and I thought she was doing the right thing. So,
but that's why it's good, right? Because if every time she made these moves, the viewer was like, "Oh, you idiot! Again, you're fucking this up." Like, it wouldn't have that same effect, right? So, kind of in transitioning from that, LVP. Let's talk about the least valuable player from this entire season. And Kate, let's stay with you. Who was your LVP from the season?
We hate Theo. We hate Theo. Theo sucks for all the reasons that we've said in every single podcast that we talk about. He's always been the LVP every single episode. Noah, I know you hate him too. Stupid hair. He just like in every single like option he has, he always does the wrong thing, always does the most terrible option. And you know, he says to Galadriel, like, this is all my fault. And I'm like, yeah, it is.
Yeah, dumbass. Totally. I mean, the first time he was on screen, I hated him just because of his stupid haircut, right? And then he proved me right every scene that he was in for the entire season. But and similar with that, my MVP are just humans as a whole. Like, I didn't necessarily feel this way in the movies. Like they portray the humans as being very stubborn and greedy and arrogant and all that. But humans as a whole, like particularly Theo, who's terrible, and Waldreg, who the unnamed villager, according to Brad, like it just portrays all of them as weak, very stupid, and very easily manipulated. And again, I didn't necessarily feel that way totally in the movies, because there just are such heroic ones. But man, yeah, humans just really were terrible and deserve the LVP, I think, for season 1. What about you, Brad? Who was your LVP?
Oh my God, this is like one of the easiest things ever. Like, you know, I want to take you guys back to approximately like 8 weeks ago when I said Galadriel was easily the LVP, and you guys, other than Ali G, Everyone thought I was nuts. I was like, yo, she is bothering everybody with her shit. She's making problems for everybody. Leave things alone. And how does the season end with us finding out? Had she stayed on the Paradise boat to Paradise Land, none of this would have happened. She had to go diving into the ocean and creating all this chaos because she couldn't let things be. So I'm gonna bookend it. My episode 1 LVP was Galadriel. My final episode of LVP is Galadriel, like hands down. I mean, you can't take a bigger L than like all that she did this season. Yeah, she's badass. Her fight scenes were sick. She had little cool moments for sure, but I don't know how you could have a bigger LVP than the person who pulls Sauron out of the water and gives him a second chance.
She didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with all the points you made, Brad, and I can confirm you did in fact have her as your LVP very early on, and all of us were like, "What the hell?" We were all kind of cringing at the fact that you had that, which I think is a perfect transition to our next award, which would be the cringe moment of the season award. So, Brad, let's keep it going. What was the thing that you cringed at and was hard for you to watch this season?
I mean, let's keep it with Galadriel riding that damn horse. I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes in the middle of the night, just picturing her face on that horse in slow motion, and being like, "Why did I need to see that?" I mean, that was it. It wasn't like, obviously not a big deal and not something that ruined the show, but I was like, I mean, you picked a hell of a time to go with some super slow motion right there. So that was probably my most uncomfortable moment of the season.
I forgot about how funny that moment was, and it just like it was one of those things that like whoever edited the episode together was like, oh, like an inside joke that they had with like their friends, or like, oh, I'm gonna put in this really pointless, stupid, really long, really slow motion scene with the close-ups of the horse's face. It just was so bizarre and didn't fit anywhere, where it's like, and it didn't mean anything. I'm sure that's something that 99% of the people that watched just completely forgot about, but it was so weird. And I totally was right with you, and I totally cringed watching that as well.
Along those same lines with the editor, can you picture the director on set that day, like telling, no, happier, really happy.
You love riding the horse.
Yeah,
you need to ride the horse.
You are so happy right now. Keep it going.
Oh my God.
Kate, does yours involve a horse? What is your cringe moment award?
I really didn't have the only one I ever brought up was like when they zoom in really big on Elrond's mouth while he's like exclaiming something that doesn't need to be said. But yeah, which I need to go back and watch that because that cracked me up. But
so do I.
I mean, other than that, like I didn't really have anything. I thought everything for the most part was really well done.
All right, yeah.
Did anything overtake the horse for you?
100% no. I mean, that was the only cringe. Like, there's things I didn't like. I mean, Theo's haircut is cringe. In episode 7, when they forcibly put Galadriel and Theo, which just seems like the most random pairing of characters ever, and like they just had all this forced dialogue and forced stupid scenes. She gives him the sword. It's like, why? Like, he's just you don't know him. He's just a random kid. Like, it was just very stupid. And I cringe. It's not that I cringe. I just kind of rolled my eyes and I'm like, get this scene over with. So there's that. But with all bad storylines, there of course must be great storylines. So what was your favorite, Kate, your favorite storyline throughout this season?
So I guess it kind of aligns with my MVP and Brad's LVP, which, by the way, I think that is the mark of a great show, where you can have a character that is MVP and also LVP. We obviously had that with House of the Dragon too, so just putting that out there. But my favorite storyline was just kind of following her from the beginning of her journey of, her brother dying and her avenging him, and just really wanting to put everything into finding Sauron and defeating him. So I just really enjoyed that, and just seeing like all the different places that she went, all the different people that get tied into that storyline was great, because obviously we got Halbrand, which we've already said is a great character too. So yeah, just her quest to overthrow Sauron, which, you know, we saw that how that ended, but
What about you, Brad?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, it's really tough. Like there are times I'm like, oh well, no, it hands down is this storyline, and like, I mean, there are parts of it I like. There are parts of it, but like, you know, Elrond and Durin kind of like they're, you know, they start off the season having been former. You know, we know okay, there was once a positive relationship between these two, but Doran doesn't seem about the fact that like Elrond was just gone for X amount of years. Like, how are they gonna kind of like, you know, rekindle his friendship? And not only you know, they make it stronger. Like, so watching that develop, and especially like kind of the conflict between, you know, the elves and the dwarves of like, you know, how deep do we, you know, dive into Khazad Dûm kind of stuff. Like, I really enjoyed like that storyline because like it was one of those times too, as much as the filmmakers or the story runner, you know, showrunners were able to kind of play mind games with the audience at times, there were certain things that we did know and we knew who was right and wrong in certain situations. And I think this was one like we kind of had foresight to say like, yeah, you guys might want to be careful with this. But I'm sure for, you know, if you were going in without that foresight, they're like, what's it? Why don't the elves help him out? Or, you know, or the dwarves like, help them out more. Like, let them dig all they want. What do they care? They're being so greedy. And we're kind of like, you know, it kind of works both ways a little bit. So I think just watching that storyline develop was probably like my favorite of the storylines.
Yeah, I think the mark of effective storytelling, once you know a direction something's going or how something is going to end, is really explaining the motivations in a way that it's not like, oh, we know these dwarves fuck up and we know they just are so greedy and then what happens. Like being able to tell that story, but seeing where they come from and understanding the motivations of why they did it. It's the same with Galadriel, right? It's the same with everything that she did and really everything that the elves did, where they need to survive. And yet what they do is ultimately empower Sauron, but they need to do what they did to survive for their race. But I think that that's just a mark of good storytelling for sure. Mine is right there too. It's just Durin and Elrond together, their pairing. I mean, Durin was my favorite character of the whole season. I thought he was great. He was funny. He was relatable. I thought for being a dwarf who, you know, digs in mines, like he was super relatable. And I think truly that their relationship was the heart and soul of the show, of this season, for sure. And I think that simultaneously their relationship was the most comedic aspect of the show, and it was also the most heartfelt, where you see these relationships between them and their family, and the friendship that they came together. I just think it was really awesome, and I enjoyed every scene with the two of them together in it. I really, really liked that. So going with that, maybe it wasn't a full storyline, but favorite moment. I mean, I think that I'll just keep it going here. My favorite moment was, again, just the relationship between Durin the Fourth, Prince Durin, and Elrond. And as you said, Brad, it starts out they haven't seen each other in a while. Elrond is not exactly welcome in Khazad Dûm, and Durin's mad at him. We see the friendship then kind of blossom and come back together, and it's really a brotherhood, which ultimately makes Durin the Third, King Durin, really pissed off when he said that, like, Elrond is as much my brother as if he was born by my mother. And like King didn't like that, but it's true. And then you see them in Lindon together, and it was just an awesome dynamic. Like the scene where they're talking to Disa, you know, over dinner, and they're like, "Oh, how did you meet?" And Elrond's like, "Yeah, I was in the forest, and I heard what I thought was a little child screaming, and it was him getting attacked, and I had to save him." So that was funny. And the story where Durin at Lindon, he makes up the story about the table and how it has such high meaning for them, and they use this material to honor their dead, and it's sacred to them. And he's just playing a joke because he wants a new table. So it was also cool to see how much they value the friendship with each other, because at times Elrond goes against the Elven High King in favor of Durin. He has his back. And Durin goes against his father, the king, in the name of friendship too. So just seeing that develop and those scenes together, that was my favorite moment, 100%. What about you, Kate? What was your favorite moment from the season?
So I know I'm like probably suffering from like a recency effect here because I'm sure there was a lot of really good stuff in like the early episodes that I'm forgetting. But I put down like the Battle of the Southlands. So I think that was episode 6 or 7, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
six
7.
six ended with the eruption.
The eruption. Okay, so episode 6. I just thought that episode was awesome. Like I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. The battle scenes were just really, really well done. And just how they did kind of like the fake out of the orcs first sent in the like people, the villagers that they had kind of captured, or not captured, but they went to their side.
Yeah.
And they sent them in. And so the villagers were like killing like basically their friends and family, which was heartbreaking. But that kind of fake out. And then also the Numenorians coming in, which was kind of reminiscent of Battle of the Bastards for me, where Jon Snow's like, I'm gonna die. You think he's gonna die? And then Sansa shows up with, and that was just a really, really cool moment. So we knew they were coming, obviously, but just cool to see them kind of run in and help save everybody. And obviously it didn't end quite with a win. Mount Doom still erupted, and we knew that was going to happen eventually, but just the whole battle scene I thought was really cool and really well done.
We obviously, as we're doing a House of the Dragon podcast, along with like a Rings of Power podcast, we see the similarities. I think one thing we haven't talked about that I always find interesting is it goes under the radar. A lot of people don't talk about him, but Chris Newman is like one of the top producers on Game of Thrones and was also one of the top producers on this show. So I'd really love to know like how much he took away from like his he's been in the business forever. He worked on like Star Wars, like Empire Strikes Back, he's been around like working with these major mythologies. So I really want to know like how much he conscientiously like took from his time on Game of Thrones and like said like, look, this is why this worked. Like, you got to have this battle that's like a big ass battle, and then when people think they figured it out, nope, that's when you like flip it and all of a sudden like, oh, you have everybody fooled. And I would love to like pick his brain about like how much of that did you take into Lord of the Rings and be like, we can't do Lord of the Rings right now when people are used to Game of Thrones. Like, it's not gonna work. We've got to make things a little bit more grittier and a little bit more nuance and things like that. So I think it's interesting. We always compare the two shows, and I'm like, there's someone who has actively had a hand in both.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, his name is always so. Like, backstory is we were actually gonna interview him. For anyone not aware, we're working on his docu-series for Geek and You Shall Find. I know Kelsey will kill us if we don't plug it. So we're working on this series, and I was actually supposed to interview him. Like we had like a date set and time and everything. I was gonna interview Chris Newman over Zoom. About his experience on Game of Thrones. He had already like read my questions, like wrote back answered. Like usually like I send people questions and then like we just talk about it. But he actually like wrote answers like in between. I was like, oh, you didn't need to like fill all this out. That's really nice of you. And then about a week before the interview, he was like, hey, I really hate to do this. And I want to say this is maybe like 3 years ago. He's like, I just got invited to a project out in London. I need to leave like in 2 days for this is totally unexpected. Like, could we take a rain check? And it ended up falling apart. I never reached back out or anything. And I'm always thinking to myself, his name is literally the first name that comes up after every episode of Rings of Power. And I'm always like, was this the project that he suddenly was like, hey, I gotta head out, man.
Wow.
I just got a call about the he didn't say what it is. Like, I just got a call about a project I need to jump on. I'm heading to London in 2 days.
Wow.
Like, we might need to save this for a later date. So that's one of the reasons why I always notice is when Rings of Power ended and I saw his name first, I was like, wait, is that the same Chris Newman? And I looked it up. So yeah, it's just really interesting to see like maybe he was brought in part. Like I said, he's got like an incredible resume. It's not like Game of Thrones made him or anything like that. He was well established well before that. But I wonder how much like Amazon was like, yo, we need to bring in someone that could bring in a little bit of knowledge about what made Game of Thrones work for fantasy and make this appeal to an audience outside of just Lord of the Rings fans.
Wow, that's really interesting. And you should probably reach back out to that guy.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, now that season 1 is done, I'm like, I'm sure you're not busy now, right?
All right. Well, it is time for our last award of this season, which is the character we wish we saw more of. So, Brad, who would that be for you? Who do you wish we got a little bit more screen time, a little bit more backstory on?
I would say, you know, it took 8 episodes for us to get the stranger forming full sentences. So would have been great. I mean, Daniel Wayman, the actor who played him, also like he crushed it, man. That guy did, and I don't mean this as a disrespect to say he did so much with so little. Like, I don't mean he had like little work, but I mean that dude was acting his ass off through like his eyes and just like one word, and you were like, oh my god, this guy is such a big heart, like, oh my god, you know, like you wanted to go to battle for that guy like so much. So by the time now he's like kind of becoming more aware of who he is and, you know, where he comes from, and he's kind of like having fuller conversations with Nori, like to leave it. And, you know, and I get it, like I'm not saying it was a bad thing on the show's part to do it, but I'm like, damn, man, now I have to wait like 2 years to get like more of this character. So I would say hands down it was the stranger, aka possible most likely Gandalf.
Okay, what about you, Kate?
So kind of going back to what you guys said for your favorite storyline, I also really, really loved the interactions between Elrond and Durin. Just thought it was like so heartfelt, and you could just tell like they had just such an awesome friendship, and I just loved that. So I wish we saw even more of it. And I just really liked Elrond as a character too. And I feel like I would have liked to know more about him and like his history and everything, like his deal. And then I also said Elendier's kids, and only because I feel like they're going to be important in season 2. Yeah, so I wish we had seen a little bit, like I wish I cared about them more.
Okay. I like it. That's a good point, I think. Mine was easily Adar. I mean, we know he was in a few episodes, not as many as he should have been probably, but we know he was Moriander, which is the first orcs, basically. He's super old, and he was a fallen elf that was taken by Morgoth and basically twisted and made into this new ruined form of life. But he's not an idiot. Again, he cares for these orcs. He considers them family. They're descendants directly of him. And I just want to know more about his story. He said he killed Sauron, and it appears that that was not a lie. He did. He killed Sauron, but Sauron is a Maiar, and so was reincarnated in the body of Halbrand, and that's what he looks like now. But we saw last episode when they kind of defeat Adar, and Halbrand has a spear to him, and he's like, do you remember me? And he's like, no, I don't. But it was just obvious, like it was obvious to me that Halbrand knew Adar, whether it was something like he killed his human family or whatever, or something. You could tell he knew him. And so I just really want to know more about the beef between Sauron and Adar, because it seems like Sauron is more about power, it's about dominating, it's about enslaving, whereas Adar just wants a place for his family, the orcs, to live, you know what I mean? So it's funny to see that kind of difference there between the two of them, and I'm just really interested in more of Adar. So
it's funny you mentioned like that scene when he had him and was like, do you remember me? And he was like, nah. I was getting man, I can't remember when in Guardians of the Galaxy when Drax was like, you know, he's like
you killed my family, and he's like, I don't even know who you are.
Yeah. I have no idea.
So savage.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
I was getting like those kind of vibes of like, dude, you're nothing to me. Like, I don't know who you are. I was definitely getting some like Drax vibes where I'm like, oh man, this guy like probably had a speech prepared.
Exactly. He's like, I've waited my whole life to find you. You've done this and this, and I've hated you forever. He's like, I have no idea who you are. So good. Well, it's time for our final thoughts on season 1. I thought personally that the CGI was incredible. I mean, anytime you have a budget that's by far the biggest show ever put into production, you'll get that, but it really was amazing visually. There were some slow moving parts, but this is Tolkien, this is Lord of the Rings, and this is how that is. And so you have to kind of expect that. I know some people online, particularly the people that are huge book readers and fans of the source material, I think there were some more deviations than they were hoping for, and so it's gotten a lot of flack online from some people that really have kind of hated because of that. But I didn't read the books, and so as a TV show watcher, I really enjoyed this. And I mean, we got Sauron's backstory, we got potentially Gandalf's backstory, we saw Numenor, Isildur's backstory, Galadriel's backstory, we saw Balrog get awakened. Like, there's just so much stuff that happened and great things to take away from this. And my favorite thing probably was just the work that they did to fool us and keep the mystery going until the last episode of who the stranger was, who Halbrand was. And when the reveals happened, I think they were done very effectively. So I'm really happy about that. What are your final thoughts on the season as a whole? Start with you, Kate.
So I thought it was really good. And I mean, obviously, like, I came into this as somebody who has seen one Lord of the Rings movie. So I wasn't really privy to any of this stuff. I mean, I kind of knew just from like popular culture references and everything, but so I really enjoyed it. I'm a fan. I'm in for season 2. I do think, kind of like you said, that there was some pacing issues where it was pretty slow in the beginning and kind of the middle there. It felt like they were just like stuck and we weren't getting anywhere. But overall, like, I really like the characters. The sets were incredible. Like, the locations were insane, so beautiful. And I think it's really probably hard to do as like a team that's making a TV show. It's hard to do a prequel where you already have these like endings that are set already, and you kind of have to figure out like what the buildup is to there. So I really appreciate all the work that they did in making that happen, giving us those backstories, and still throwing, like, I know you guys mentioned throughout our podcast and everything, all the like throwbacks that they did to the Lord of the Rings movies and the books and everything. So I think that that's really cool that they paid a lot of homage to that. But I'm pretty psyched for season 2. I think it's going to be really good. I think that the budget was well worth it. Like, you can tell they spent a lot of money on it. But overall, like, I was pretty happy watching it.
Brad?
I loved it. I really did. Like, someone who like is a big fan of Lord of the Rings to begin with. I mean, I'm so thankful that I got to see. And that's the thing, is like, I think a lot of fans, like, I get some fans being mad about, oh, this wasn't consistent with this. Like, I totally get that. But like, I'm more of a take a moment to appreciate the fact that, like, I never got, thought I'd get to see like Numenor brought to life, like, on this scale. Like, it looked incredible. Like, it's a TV show. Like, it look, and I know obviously, 20 years have passed or whatever, but like, this looks 1,000 times better than the movies did. We're getting to like watch this at home. Like, that's crazy. Like, how's that doing? Like,
We're very spoiled.
Yeah, like, so hopefully fans like take it in consideration. That's like really cool. And there are a lot of generations of Tolkien lovers and Lord of the Rings fans that like didn't get to see this, like, for themselves. So, again, like, I get it. I'm never going to make excuses for like, oh, let them do whatever they want and they don't need to be consistent with anything. Like, I'm not saying that, but for a lot of the fans that are upset about this stuff, it's like, you've really gotten to enjoy it. I mean, I grew up remembering like the Hobbit animated movie. Like, we've come a long way. Like, yeah. So, I'd like to see fans like appreciate that a little bit more, because I definitely did.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Geek and You Shall Find podcast. If you are a lover of the Rings of Power and want to go back and watch some of our previous episodes talking about each individual episode, please do that. We also are doing this whole thing on House of the Dragon. So feel free to go back, check out our previous episodes there. But we'll be back this week with the new episode, the 9th episode of House of the Dragon. So make sure to subscribe, hit the little bell on YouTube, which will notify you when the episodes drop. Thank you for getting geeky with us. Thank you for listening. And to all of our subscribers in South Africa, tote scenes.
Nice.
Tote scenes.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Geek and You Shall Find podcast, powered by Superhero Faces. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Superhero Faces, and on Instagram at superhero_faces.